Welcome to the Working at Heights in Construction webinar hosted by SafeWork New South Wales. My name is Johnny Auditore, State Inspector with the Construction Services Group, and I'll be your host for today. I am joined by my fellow inspector colleagues, who I'll introduce to you shortly. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I am conducting this webinar from the lands of the Burmaracal clan of the Darug people. I also like to acknowledge the First Nations people participating in this webinar. This webinar session will run for approximately 45 minutes. As you can see, Slido is enabled on your screen, so you can enter your questions for the panel. This session will be recorded and will be made available on our website in the coming weeks. We will commence this webinar with a presentation that will cover the following information. This includes the statistical data behind Working at Heights, the legislative requirements to manage working at height risks, the review of past incidents, and the resources available to assist you with compliance. We will then finish off with a live Q&A session with the inspectors. We will now commence the presentation. As you can see, these statistics speak for themselves and clearly shows the magnitude of the risk associated with working at heights, especially in the construction sector. Fall from heights has consistently over the years been identified as a key harm and is the number one cause of fatalities in the building and construction industry. The most serious and fatal falls are from a height of less than 4 metres, which is generally from a single-storey building or off a ladder. Between the period of 2017 and 2020, 38 people have lost their lives, which falls from heights was the main contributing factor. And the average falls from heights construction claims cost is approximately 3 times higher than the actual average construction claims cost. This continues to be a priority for SafeWork New South Wales. We recently launched our own Working at Heights in Construction compliance program. This is currently running over a 12-month period that includes site visits, campaigns, and education. Fall from heights is not only a major issue for New South Wales workplaces, but an issue for all workplaces nationally and globally. Other countries around the globe are managing the risk of falls through various methods. As you can see in this slide, other countries regulate working at heights differently, such as relying on permit systems and mandatory training, as well as licensing. At a national level, recently the heads of workplace safety authorities for Australia and New Zealand have agreed to establish a working group to tackle the specific issue of falls in the construction sector. Hopefully in the near future, we will see a coordinated national approach in addressing this issue. Now, let's have a look at what your duties are as a PCBU. A PCBU is a person conducting the business or undertaking and is the legal term we use for a business. The WHS regulations detail the PCBU duties in Part 3.1 for managing risks to health and safety, requiring the BCPU to 1. Identify the hazards, managing the risk to health and safety by firstly eliminating the risk or by using a hierarchy control, the ongoing maintenance of controls, and the reviewing of the implemented control measures. In the WHS regulations under Part 4.4, which covers falls, Clause 78 states that a PCBU at a workplace must manage the risk to health and safety associated with a fall by a person from one level to another that is reasonably likely to cause the injury. In any event, when work involves the risk of falls, it must be carried out on the ground or on solid construction if it's reasonably practical to do so. And finally, provide a safe means of access to and from the work area. Before I proceed with the next slide, I would like to debunk any myths around what constitutes height. There is no prescribed set height limit that establishes working at heights. The test is that applied is if a person is at risk of injury from falling from one level to another. The only time height measurements are mentioned in legislation is in reference to activities conducted at a height greater than 2 metres, classifying the task as high-risk construction work, requiring a SafeWork method statement for the activity. Clause 79 in the regulation states the specific risk control requirements for working at heights. If it's not reasonably practical to work from the ground or from a solid construction, you must firstly provide a fall prevention device. If that is not reasonably practical to do so, then secondly, provide a work positioning system. If that is not reasonably practical to do so, then thirdly, provide a fall arrest system. Anecdotal evidence suggests that a PCBU, when managing the risk of working at heights, tend to use a fall arrest system, for example a harness, as their first preference in managing this risk. Most PCBUs don't know that this action is in breach with legislation. You must consider higher order controls as your first preference as prescribed, such as fall prevention device, for example scaffolding, roof guardrails or an elevated work platform, before selecting a fall arrest system. You can also use a combination of these prescribed controls to minimise the risks so far as reasonably practical. Clause 80 sets out emergency procedure requirements when utilising a fall arrest system. I encourage you to also be across this clause, as the requirements will be checked on site by an inspector when visiting a site that's utilising a fall arrest system. This includes the availability of an emergency plan which contains a rescue procedure, evidence the emergency plan being tested for effectiveness, and has adequate training and instruction being given in relation to the emergency procedure. Looking at the hierarchy and control when managing the risk of falls in the workplace, the legislation says that eliminating the need to work at a height is the most effective way of protecting workers from the risk of falls. This can be done by either working on the ground or on a solid construction. Examples of tasks that can be carried out on the ground to eliminate the risk of falls are prefabricating roof trusses at the ground level, prefabricating wall frames horizontally, then standing them up vertically, prefabricating formwork shutters horizontally, then erecting them vertically, or using long-handled tools instead of a ladder. Also, working from a solid construction provides an environment where the risk of fall may be eliminated. The use of fall prevention devices is the most effective means of managing the risk of falls after elimination. It prevents a person from falling from an open edge or penetration with the use of a physical barrier. In addition, the use of a fall prevention device increases site productivity whilst reducing the risk to workers as opposed to using a fall arrest system. As you can see on the screen, from left to right, there are some good examples of fall prevention devices. These include temporary edge protection, such as roof guard rails, elevated work platform, scaffolding and penetration covers, just to name a few. So what are the things you need to assess before entering a work area with a risk of falls? Firstly, you should identify the weight-bearing capability of the work area in holding persons or materials. For example, roof may be made of a brittle material such as asbestos or polycarbonate that may break under the weight of a person, which can cause a falls risk. Secondly, you would need to identify if there is an open edges, voids or penetrations where persons may fall that will require physical barriers such as temporary guardrails and penetration covers. And thirdly, consider the activity to be performed, the location and the accessibility of the work site to determine if you can utilise other forms of fall prevention devices such as scaffolding, elevated work platforms to complete the task safely. As you can see here, there are a couple of examples of work positioning systems involving total restraint system and rope access system. This is only to be used if you cannot use a fall prevention device. This system is only effective if the user is trained and competent in using the system correctly. Here are some of the do's and don'ts for work positioning systems. They are: it must be used by a competent person that is trained, must provide adequate supervision, you must ensure equipment is regularly inspected, you don't disconnect or adjust during the use or have parts interchange, and you do not remove it from the static line until the user either reaches the endpoint or moves back to the entry point. The lanyard is at a fixed length and cannot be adjusted. The last order of control prescribed in the regulation to manage the risk of falls is the use of a fall arrest system, such as a harness. This system normally requires multiple anchor points to cover the working area, or for the user to install and connect to the anchors as they traverse the entire work area. These systems rely heavily on the worker behaviour to ensure effectiveness and often fails due to incorrect setup or application. So what does a SafeWork inspector look for when on a site that is utilising a fall arrest system? The PCBU must demonstrate that they have considered all other options, such as the use of a fall prevention device, before deciding on the use of a fall arrest system to determine compliance with the legislation. They must have a site emergency plan that they have been tested. The reliance on calling the rescue service or the ambulance as a control measure is not sufficient. They must have a SafeWork method statement, equipment register and associated anchor plans, and have records to demonstrate training and proper instruction being provided to the workers in relation to the use of these systems. Please note, using a fall arrest system on a single-storey residential home does not necessarily offer protection, as the roof height will not provide sufficient clearance to the ground to enable the fall arrest system to activate. SafeWork New South Wales is taking a zero-tolerance approach to PCBUs who put workers' safety at risk. There are existing on-the-spot penalties that relates to falls ranging from $2,160 to $3,600 for PCBUs and $720 for workers. A PCBU can be prosecuted with penalties up to $1.5 million. We are now going to review a few incidents that occurred in the workplace in relation to falls. These can be found on our website. In this incident, a 28-year-old worker was installing insulation bats on the third level of a residential construction build when he fell approximately 3 metres through the stair void onto the concrete floor. He sustained serious head and spinal injury. So what are the risk control measures that should be in place? Work to be carried out on a solid construction or use of a scaffold to prevent the person from falling. The use of a fit-for-purpose void covers that accommodate safe access, and a SafeWork method statement that is site-specific is prepared before work commences with agreed controls to manage the falls risks. Here we had a 43-year-old worker was standing on a plank which was placed on top of an A-frame ladder on one end and on the other end resting on a scaffold. The plank was set up to raise the worker high enough to install the roof section. The worker was standing less than 2 metres when 2 metres on the plank when he fell backwards and suffered a serious head injury. So what risk control measures can be used to prevent this incident from occurring? One is the provision of a work platform that is suitable for the task, such as scaffolds, elevated work platforms or scissor lift. If you are using a trestle type setup, you must ensure that you have at least 2 planks with guardrails installed to prevent falls, and workers will be provided with a safe way to access and exit the work area. In this case, a 52-year-old worker tragically lost his life when he was cleaning the roof gutter and fell 3 metres through a roof onto a concrete pavement at a school. This occurred when he stepped onto a polycarbonate roof sheeting. This tragedy could have been easily avoided by assessing the work area to ensure work surface is suitable to hold the weight of workers and associated materials, the installation of guardrails around non-trafficable areas or use a work positioning system, and the placement of covers over non-trafficable areas. We recently released a Working at Heights and Construction Inspection checklist, which is available via our SafeWork New South Wales website. This checklist covers the main areas a SafeWork New South Wales inspector would normally inspect on your site as part of the Working at Heights compliance program visit. This is a great checklist to assist you in getting your site compliant with relevant in relation to Working at Heights. I strongly encourage you to download this checklist. I just want to share some information on other resources that is available on our website. We have a Working at Heights construction webpage, which has great resources, including our new checklist, videos, guides, and other useful information. We have a Safety Cast podcast series, which covers many construction safety related topics, including Working at Heights. We also have a Speak Up app available to download. This is an effective tool to use to report WHS concerns that you may have to us. In addition, we provide financial assistance through our small business rebate program of $1,000 to purchase safety items to improve safety in your workplace. After the Q&A section, links to our campaigns page with all the relevant resources will be sent out to you via email. So before I introduce our expert panel members who will be able to answer your questions today, I just wanted to remind you to type your questions into Slido on your screen. You'll also be able to like other people's questions that are posted to help in progressing them up higher up in the order in the queue. We will now cross over to the inspector panel for our Q&A session. Okay, so I'll start off by introducing our inspectors that are on the panel today. So first of all, we've got Joshua Kent. So he's our engineering expert. So he's in the engineering team. We've got Stephen Charles, he's Assistant State Inspector on our Metro construction team. And we've got Andrew Komisarchuk, who's our Assistant State Inspector for our regional construction team. So welcome, guys. So first question we've got here is that what will inspectors be looking for when they attend site?
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. We will be looking essentially at everything. We're even looking at amenities, but concentrating on working at heights. Obviously, we'll be looking at scaffold systems, making sure that the scaffolds are compliant, edge protection, making sure that the edge protection is in place and is erected effectively. And another big issue, particularly for two-storey residential sites and also commercial and multi-level sites, are your voids. So we want to make sure that the voids are covered or effectively have barriers in place. We'll be looking at site security as well. and also SafeWork method statements. And this is particularly an important aspect where often contractors forget to do this. So it is a consultative risk management tool, so you need to make sure that you have SafeWork method statements for working at heights where a person is at risk of falling more than 2 metres.
Yeah, and I think the good thing is, as well as Johnny mentioned in the presentation, all of those things are actually listed on the checklist that's available on the website that'll be sent out to you after today's session. So obviously the focus is on working at heights, but there's also going to be all the any other risks and harms that we identify. So from the site security, electrical, moving plant, pretty much you name it, we're going to look at it from a safety context. We're not going to be pigeonholed just into heights, but even though that's our target at the moment.
And there are inspectors visiting certain areas in a given day. So, essentially, we're targeting working at heights.
Okay, then. So next question I've got here is that how do I stop workers from altering the scaffold, in particular handrail and ties? So that's probably a common issue we see out on site.
Yeah, I think a lot of this comes down to planning. Also, there are devices out there, anti-tampering devices that you can actually use on scaffold systems. But essentially, one of the biggest ways of doing it is making sure the site supervisors tell their contractors do not remove the components such as the ledges, the most common one, and ties. Essentially, the supervisors need to direct these contractors not to touch the scaffold. Only scaffolders can do it.
Yeah, I think the other thing, the scaffold industry safety standard, I know Josh had a big hand in writing and putting some content into. So, it's primarily planning, Josh, is one of the things to look at.
It is that. It's available on our website. It's been up for about a year now. It was written actually out of the Macquarie Park scaffold collapse. A lot of people are probably familiar with that. It was a very high profile incident in New South Wales. And it talks a lot about scaffold management because removing ties, removing components, it's entirely predictable. If you run a tie through a window opening, at some point the glazing's going to go in and the tie's going to come out. You can predict that well and truly before it happens. So a little bit of planning goes a long, long way. There's also a little bit in that standard. There's some newer technologies that are coming into play now. We're seeing them start to get a pickup. So some anti-tamper devices that you can put on scaffold components. They may become bigger and more widely available in the future. But a very important one. Make sure all the contractors and people on site know, firstly, not to tamper with the scaffold and who they can contact if the scaffold's in their way. It will get in the way. It just does. Construction sites are so dynamic by their nature that's going to happen. But if they've got somebody to contact to deal with the issue for them so they don't try and fix it themselves on the fly, it will go a long way.
Active and available supervision.
Yes.
It's probably a big takeaway is make sure you, as the supervisor, you're there and you're contactable and you have that rapport with the contractors so that they can get things fixed when they need it changed to suit their work and keep it in a safe condition.
Okay, this is a good one. I understand that higher order controls must be used, but is there a maximum duration for which work can be performed whilst wearing a harness as a full arrest system?
Okay, to answer the actual question the way it's written, which is you could wear a harness. There would be a problem if you were suspended in the harness because of suspension trauma after you've fallen. But actually, if you're using a harness as a control measure, no, you can wear it for a long time. I don't think that's what the question's asking. I think they're talking more about, is there a division between when I should be using, say, edge protection or whether putting edge protection is so onerous and the task is so fast that I'm okay to go and use a harness? That's very, very hard to answer because it's a very site-specific, scenario-specific situation. But one of the things to remember, two things to remember about harnesses. Firstly, by the time you do fall arrest, you're conceding that you're going to fall. All the harness is going to do is hopefully stop you getting too badly hurt. It's not even a guarantee that you won't get injured in a fall when you're wearing a fall arrest harness. People don't appreciate that very well. And secondly, stopping the fall is only one part of when you're looking at using a harness-based system for work. You've got to have anchorages and people who can install them. You've got to have workers trained to use them. You've got to plan for rescue so that if you fall, you're not going to end up suspended, which probably means you're going to need more anchor points, more equipment, more workers, and more training. You've got to be able to do the job you're going to do while you're in the harness so it can't interfere with your work. And you've probably got to get your equipment up there as well, your tools or solar panels if you're installing solar or whatever. By the time you look at it, a lot of times people think a very quick job actually becomes very complicated when you try and do it properly in a harness.
Yeah, I think that's probably the key point, is actually that consideration once you are getting to a fall arrest system is the amount of work to do that properly.
Yes.
And I think, unfortunately in industry, we haven't really covered off. People think one anchor, rope, harness, good to go. But like you've elaborated on, it's multiple anchors, it's multiple lines, it's multiple different points. And by the time you get it all up there, it could have actually probably been quicker and easier to go with a higher order control like a roof rail or a scaffold even.
Yeah.
And I've found in practical aspect with the inspections that often they'll have the harnesses, but when you ask them to put them on, they don't know how to put them on.
Yeah.
That's a big issue.
Or when they're not connected to anything.
Yes.
Or they're connected to the wrong thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
I see that quite often as well. Okay, so next question we've got here is that when working on a roof, do workers have to wear a harness at all times when no other edge protection is in use? And the second part of that question is, does the exclusion zone come into play when not working on an edge?
So we do have a document on our website that talks a little bit about exclusion zones for roof work. It's a solar installer's guide, but it's a good place to look. If you have safe access to a roof and you can clearly delineate a 3-meter separation point from an edge, that document considers that a good enough control measure. Now, clearly delineate would be running tape or barricades or something that clearly indicates it, but not necessarily full-on total edge protection. You still need safe access. Yes, you can do it. That's something that we do allow. But the second part of the question as well is, do I have to wear a harness at all times? If that's what the control measure is, if that's what you've decided to use and that's how it works on site, then yes, you do.
Did we say flat roof? I just want to confirm.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, that just says a roof. The way the question was asked, this only applies to a flat roof below a 5-degree pitch. Like it's,
Yep. So it's trafficable.
It's easily navigable surface, and obviously, primarily that's going to be in your commercial spaces, not really in a residential setting. So warehousing, potentially some Class 2 buildings if they're big enough, they've got a big enough footprint. But that only applies to a flat roof, and like Josh said, got to have the system of work in place for safe access to begin with, and setting up your system.
Yeah. And also, depending on the type of roof, other than being a flat roof, there are guardrail systems that can actually be installed from ground up. The solar panel industry have learnt to use these, so that may be another opportunity as well.
Now, I think also just one very important to point out, we actually don't get a lot of falls off roof edges. Yep. They are through like open penetrations, or they're through alcinite sheeting or the asbestos tiles. They're through weak surfaces.
And also incomplete roofs, so working in truss spaces and stuff where it's not a complete structure. It's into the building generally, not off the edge of. I think that's the easiest takeaway. And
falling off ladders is another one.
Yeah.
So safe access,
It's funny you mentioned ladders because that's the next question. So we'll get into that one. So how do you secure and work from a ladder, so either an extension or a step ladder, up against the wall where the ability to secure the top of the ladder is not possible, and where the ability to install a temporary anchor point is not possible as well?
Okay, well, with ladders, look at how you're using the ladder first of all, because if the ladder's that question says you're working off the ladder. So I'd assume a scenario like you've put the ladder up against a wall and maybe you're doing painting or something like that. You probably don't need to secure the top of the ladder in that case. If the bottom is secure, your weight is staying in between the stiles while you're doing your work, so you're not reaching out side to side or anything like that. It's a pretty, and your 3 points of contact, it's a pretty good work platform to use. But if you're getting off the ladder, so if you're using the ladder for access, you've got it leant up against, say, a roof, and you're getting off the ladder and then from the roof back onto the ladder, big problem, because as you go back onto the ladder, your body weight goes around the stile and it pulls the stile off the roof, pulls the ladder off the roof. that needs to be secured at the top because of what you're doing. If you can't secure it at the top, it's really not the appropriate way to be accessing the roof via a ladder that way. You'll have to find some other way to do it. So,
I was just coming onto the ladder point and that 3 points of contact. I think maybe the more importantly is we focus on not overbalancing.
Yes.
Is not overreaching or overbalancing on a ladder, because that's where, sometimes, 3 points of contact is great to maintain if you can. And, it's primarily for that traffic of a ladder, like going up and down or whatnot. But a lot of those incidents we see is people overreaching and overbalancing. So it's not the ladder going, it's them going off the ladder and then in conjunction with it not supported at the top or something like that. And also using facing the ladder when you're using it. I've had a few incidents where people are turned around on the ladder and they're reaching off against the angle of the ladder, where that can go a little bit high.
Yeah, if that's what you have to do, if you have to lean side to side or you have to go down and reposition it, go up and go down and do that a lot or face the wrong way, it's the wrong tool for that job.
Yeah. And another thing that I see out on the site with the step ladders, straddling the ladders as if they're cowboys. Not a really good idea. You fall, the ladder's going to fall on you. You could hit something on the ground apart from your head hitting the concrete. So no straddling of ladders.
Okay then, so I've got one here. What is the best way to secure a scaffold area and ensure the scaffold is not accessible by visitors or members of the public if in a busy public area?
You still have the obligation to secure the scaffold. So if you're in a public space, you need to remove it from the public space as much as you can. So temporary site fencing, hoardings, those sorts of things. Also, depending on your access methodology to your scaffold, if it can easily be removed or locked off with some physical barriers. If someone wants to climb something, you may not necessarily be able to stop them, but you need to do the best you possibly can to secure your site and prevent that unauthorised access, as we have that requirement for construction sites.
And this is a big issue where there's scaffold erected where people are still living within the housing situation. So you need to make sure that you put a barrier up, whether it's ply, whether it's some other fencing system, to make sure that, in particular, children don't start climbing it.
Okay, this looks like a Josh question. So, what qualifications needed to able to install an anchor using the full arrest system, and does the anchor need to be load tested or verified prior to use?
There's no high risk work license type requirement for doing that kind of work. There's a underlying requirement in work health and safety legislation that everybody should be competent to do their work, so have sufficient training, instruction, information, supervision to do the job properly. That applies to all harness work. So if you're installing an anchor, you should know how to install it in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions, know what kind of substrate it can be installed on, and know if there's any visual checks or the likes that would tell you whether it's installed properly. So some might be a torque type of thing that you torque up to a certain torque. As to should you do a pull test, again, that would depend on the anchor. Glued in ones, anchors that are glued into concrete, you can probably get away with doing a pull test on those type of things. Something that's been riveted or tech screwed onto roof sheeting, you wouldn't do a pull test on it, because the way the standard works for the loading, it's actually an ultimate load test that they have to hold. You can bend, buckle and deform an anchor all you want, as long as it can hold the 15 kilonewtons. So if you start to do a proof test of 15 kilonewtons, you're probably going to damage it. You're going to certainly push it past its yield point. It's going to be bent and deformed. It's essentially seen a fall arrest load, and once you see that load, you're supposed to take it out of service. So doing the test would warrant you taking the device out of service.
I think maybe even just looking at the context of the question there, Johnny, is more, if it's purchased in Australia, making sure that it complies to the relevant standard as well, because those standards obviously will have the test parameters in there.
Yes.
So making sure that whatever device you buy, you're not fashioning your own anchor. If you're buying something that's commercially available, that it does comply with the Australian standard.
And it'll have to have instructions.
Yeah, well, it will come with
part of our legislation. It's required to have it. So if they haven't given it to you, get in contact with them and get them off. They're required to provide it to you.
Don't use it until you understand how to use it.
Exactly, yes.
Okay, so another one here is that where can I get more info on roof rails, and do I need a licensed installer?
No, you don't. I'm guessing, yes, once upon a time you needed a scaffolder's license to do that kind of work, but that's not the case anymore with the way we have licensing. So much like the previous question, you need to be trained and competent to do the work. So you don't need a specific high-risk work license to just install roof rails, although if you were using a scaffold as also your barrier edge protection and catch deck, yes, you might need a scaffolder's license for that scenario. There's many products available now. And again, like the previous question, get in contact with the supplier manufacturer for the instructions on how to install their product properly, what types of roofs, eaves, or whatever they can be installed into.
Yeah, a lot of the manufacturers now are actually putting out videos too, like and doing install videos and part of that to provide instruction to the purchaser, which is it's really quite valuable, I think. And some of them are offering services where you can actually go in and play with the system and they'll provide some on-site training to give you a bit of a more indication before you rely on it.
Yeah.
Interesting, I had recently attended an incident where guardrails were installed, and it wasn't the guardrails that failed, it was actually where it was attached to. It was knotted timbers, and three of the guys were leaning on it. Why they were leaning on it, I don't know, but essentially the whole thing collapsed because of the timbers.
So this comes back to checking the substrate and the anchor.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Like Josh said, for the fall anchor, just making sure the material's capable of withstanding the load.
And it was signed off. So there you go.
Yeah.
And just another tip, if you are doing like a web search, if you just type in roof rails, you probably get roof rails for vehicles. So if you type in roof guardrails, you'll get the correct products for that type of edge protection. So that's something I learnt myself. All right, so next question here is that when restoring a roof, are you better off setting up with a full scaffold system?
Yes.
Yep.
It's hard. Depends on the site, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And depends on the pitch of the roof and lots of things go into it. But yes, if you can use higher order control measures, so like scaffolding and edge protection, you're far better using those.
Yeah, definitely.
I think it comes back, like you said, with the methodology and pitch of the roof, because is it 36 degrees, Josh, for roof guardrails?
It depends. So some guardrails can only do 15 or less because they haven't passed a dynamic impact test. And then you've got 15 to 35 of the guardrails that can handle a dynamic impact. And then over that, then you would need to get some engineered product because the standard doesn't cover that kind of thing. And also one of the things you'd be considering doing roofs is you're taking parts of the roof out. So now you've got the problem of falling through the roof, which, as we said earlier, that's far more common from our incident point of view than the edge.
Yeah, so full perimeter scaff is probably, in a practicality from a safest point, it's probably the best option.
Yep. Okay, so one I've got here is that is there any standard around the use of ladders or mobile scaffolds when already at height? So, for example, use of a ladder on a balcony where there's a risk of falls.
Well, it comes down to risk assessment. This happens quite a fair bit. And if the person's working, say, on a balcony on a ladder, they fall off that ladder, they're going to go over that handrail. So really, it's is it appropriate to use a ladder on that basis? It just comes down to each situation.
Yeah, it would mean the balustrade there's not offering any protection anymore because you've climbed above the height of it.
Yep.
So you need to provide safe access and a safe environment for that additional level of height.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yep.
So what are the training requirements for working at heights?
Okay. If we go to the legislation, because that's what needs to be complied with, under Section 19, which is the primary duty of care for persons conducting a business or undertaking, they need to provide training and instruction. When you dig down a little bit deeper under Clause 39, It gives you a little bit of insight what sort of training is required from a general basis. So the first thing that you need to take into consideration is what the work activity is. So let's say roofing. The second aspect that you need to take into consideration is what are the risks. So in this case, falls. And the next important part is what are the control measures. So those three elements need to be taught to those workers, and importantly, it needs to be understood by all and sundry. So we have a lot of non-English speaking background people working in the industry, or what we call these days culturally and linguistically diverse. So it needs to be, they need to understand that because they're vulnerable workers as well as young workers who, by and large, think they're invincible. And of course, you've got older workers who perhaps say, I've been doing it for 30 years like this. So, and that's a problem too. So the whole aspect of training is very, very important. And it's those four factors that need to be taken into consideration.
Okay.
I think also specifically heights, a question that pops up every now and then. You can go and do working at heights courses. They tend to be a half-day course, and they're good as an introduction. They'll teach you the terminology and some of the systems of work. The problem we get as inspectors, we've trained our workers, we send them to a course, and you look into it, the course didn't teach them the system of work they're using. It didn't use the equipment that they're using. So it really hasn't trained them for their job. You've done a training course, that's good, and they've got some familiarity of heights, but they are not trained to a level where they can do their job properly just by that course alone.
And the general working at heights ticket is a working at heights operator ticket. It really sits back to putting your harness on and clipping onto an established system. It's not about establishing where to put your anchor points or how you transition from one anchor to another, like double lanyarding and all the different methodologies. There's actually, I think, 3 or 4 levels of courses that actually would need to be done to be, fully proficient at using a harness-based system of work. So it's not super readily available, which is unfortunate. And probably something there is a gap there in the training, I think, across industry that needs to be addressed. But you need additional training providers to come online, additional subject matter experts to do that training. So, like you said, Josh, once you've done one level, it sort of just goes, you've done one level, but it's so minute in the scale of the actual holistic system working at heights.
And of course, the other thing, you can train your own workers. You don't have to send them to an external course to do training. So if you've got people who are experienced and know what they're doing, know how to use the product, they can train their other workers. There's nothing wrong with that. It's
got to be competent.
Yes.
That's the key. Just know what you're doing and how to do it correctly.
And there's another aspect to this too, is supervision. There needs to be supervision for these high-risk work activities. I've seen this time and time again with solar panel installation. Often it's people from non-English speaking backgrounds. They've got their own ABN, they're on their own working visas. They have no idea of the risk nor the controls that is required for working at heights. And it's something that SafeWork really looks strongly with. So, you need supervision as well.
Yeah, I think maybe also to highlight that scale as well. Like it's more training, definitely. Less supervision, and more experience. So it's always going to be a balancing and float act for however your workforce is set up.
Okay, so I've probably got time for one more question here. Will work at height permits be introduced as a mandatory requirement in the future? So it's a current understanding that these have been implemented at discretion of businesses. So
we'll never say never. Maybe is the short answer to that. So working at heights is an issue. SafeWork New South Wales recognises it. Every other jurisdiction across Australia recognises it. We all work together as well to try and push health and safety forward, and we've all broadly agreed to look into more, or what regulatory approaches can we take to improve the outcomes for falls. So New South Wales drafted an options paper. That is actually now available on our website. You can go and take a look at it. It's some ideas I think we will look at in future that we can do as a regulator to improve, to reduce the number of falls. And training and licensing are some things I think we'll look at. We've had very broad agreement that that's something to look into at a national level. What it would look like when you implement it, couldn't say at this stage. I've always said training is already a mandatory requirement of legislation. I always say training is great, but training somebody to stand 2 meters back from an edge is never going to be as good as putting edge protection up. So training has its place, absolutely, but it won't solve every problem for you.
But I think also, just they mentioned a permitting system. A permit is just an admin control. It's, we've got high order controls that can be used. So a permit is just going to be an administrative checkpoint along the way. I think we've got more issues to make sure that we actually get the physical controls in place before we worry about an additional admin control in a legislative perspective.
Yeah, from a systems perspective, and more so safety culture perspective, I'd recommend that PCBUs or persons conducting business or undertakings invest in improving the safety culture in this industry. Having been an inspector for quite some time, I'm seeing the same old, and essentially we need to educate, and that's businesses as well, need to educate and convince these workers to look after themselves, but others, and make sure that there are adequate protections to prevent people from falling and stop taking shortcuts.
Okay, so I think it's about time now. So this concludes our session. So a big thank you to our panel members. So thank you for sharing your insights. So as mentioned in the presentation, we will be sending out an email with all the relevant resource links and also a short survey. So I ask if you can please complete that survey. And if you have any further questions, please reply to that email. So once again, thank you all for joining us today, and stay safe.